Good evening, brothers, fratters, sorors, ladies and gentlemen, guests. Good evening. I'm Brother Kenneth Barnes, and I'm proud to serve as the International Executive Director for the Omega Psi Phi Fraternity. And on behalf of our 41st Grand Bacillus, Brother Dr. David Marion, the Supreme Council, and the men of Omega, we welcome all of you to Omega's Voters' Rights, Suppression, Education, and Mobilization virtual town hall. This undertaking was not taken lightly, and we thank the Social Action Committee of our fraternity, spearheaded by Brother Cedric Spencer as chairman and his committee, for pulling this together and making it reality. And we thank all of you for joining us this evening. I'd like to introduce who will now bring us our opening prayer, our 12th Grand Chaplain in the 109-year history of our beloved fraternity, none other than our own Brother Dr. Walter T. Richardson.
Gracious God, the creator of blackness and relevance, thank you for being God of our weary years and silent tears. Thank you for your enduring love and care that have kept us from extermination, extinction, and non-personhood. After all we've been through, because of you, we are still here. We've come to you at a very strange time, disturbed and yes, even distracted by the speed bumps manipulatively manufactured and strategically placed to slow us down and perhaps even stop us on the road to equality and justice. But during this strange time, you have chosen us to serve for such a time as this. In the midst of viruses, violence, violations, vehemence, and routine voter suppression, you've chosen us. Maybe soon on our watch, we will be done with faulty voting machines, purged rolls, and locked and closed precincts, gerrymandered squiggly county lines, and uncounted ballots. Maybe soon we'll be done with the troubles of egregious, unjust acts, devaluation of humans, and others with dark skin. We pray your blessings upon us as we listen and learn from our bold leaders and each other how we should proceed. May the voices we hear charge us and challenge us to make our country an ideal place to work, worship, and witness. You did it. In just 33 years, you changed everything, politically, socially, and spiritually. And we thank you for showing us the way. Yes, oh Lord, I'm talking about you, with your bad self, with your less than privileged background, from intimidation and humiliation to exaltation. We pray to you now. You're that Black Nazarene named Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Brother Dr. Richardson. The men of Omega, we're very excited about the panelists that we have coming before us tonight. But the first individual that I'd like to introduce is no stranger, and we are very pleased to have her in our presence. And that would be none other than Congresswoman Karen Bass, who represents the 37th District of California, but also serves as the chair for the Congressional Black Caucus. We are pleased and honored to have her with us. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Representative Bass. Welcome.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, to all of the Omegas. Thank you for the work that you do in our communities every single day. And we are, I believe it's 111th day from 111 days away from an election. You know, every 4 years we say it's the most important election of our lifetime. And I was saying at the beginning of this year that this election was going to determine the quality of life for Black folks and everybody else for the next 2 generations because of the strategy of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who have decided that the most important thing for them to do is to confirm judges that don't look like us and don't care about us, but judges that are young enough to be there for 2 generations. So this election is going to impact the next 2 generations, but then COVID hit. And now I say that this election is a matter of life or death. Over 135 Americans have died in the last 4 months. We don't know how many of those people that died look like us, but I know that it was very disproportionate to our numbers in the population. And so we were talking in the Congressional Black Caucus that maybe we need to launch a national campaign because 99% of those people that died were of voting age. And maybe we all need to make a commitment, and maybe it's something that the Omegas can think about. Maybe we need to register 5 people for every one of those that died in their honor. And so it's something that we should think about. The way this pandemic has been handled in our country, if we don't have new leadership in January, I just don't know what'll happen to us, which is why I say that this election is a matter of life and death. The other reason is because voter suppression now, we need to be able to vote at home. That's what we need to do. That's the way to stay safe and to stay healthy. And I think of what the pandemic is doing in some of our southern states and how many people are dying there. The hospitals are full. So we need to fight when we're fighting for voting rights, when we're fighting for the reauthorization of the Voting Rights Act, that passed out of the House. It's languishing in the Senate. But when we're thinking of voting rights this time, we need to be making sure that we can vote at home. We also have to make sure that we educate folks about voting and about the significance of this election and putting it in the dire straits that it actually is. But one thing that I know about our folks is that I don't care how much you try to stop us from voting. When we organize and when we mobilize, we can overcome voter suppression, even the voter suppression of this time where our health is at risk. So I just want to thank you for the honor of being with you today and to say that in addition to voting, remember also the census. You still have time to fill out your census forms. That determines resources in our community for the next decade. So thank you for letting me join you today. I just want to honor all of the Omegas and all of the work that you do in our communities every day. Thank you.
Representative Bass, you honor us with your presence. We thank you and the Congressional Black Caucus for all of the work that you have done, you continue to do, and just know that the men of Omega stand beside you from this day point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, the next person that I'd like to bring up would be none other than our leader, our esteemed leader. He is none other than our 41st Grand Bosselors. And without further ado, I'd like all of the men of Omega to stand to their feet and welcome our Grand Bosselors, Brother Dr. David Marion.
Thank you so much, Brother Executive Director Barnes, for that introduction. We thank Representative Chairwoman Bass for her comments, and you're absolutely right that Omega stands ready to fight this fight with the Congressional Black Caucus. I'd like to introduce the panelists that will be speaking for this voter right suppression, education, and mobilization symposium. And the first person, as I introduce you, you'll be and have the opportunity to make some opening remarks. And so the first person that I'd like to introduce is Dr. Theodore Johnson. Dr. Johnson is a retired commander in the U.S. Navy following a 2-decade career that included service as a White House fellow, military professor at the U.S. Naval College, and speechwriter to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Dr. Johnson is currently a senior fellow at the Brennan Center for Justice. His work explores the role that race plays in electoral politics, issue framing, and disparities in policy outcomes. Please welcome my brother, Dr. Ted Johnson.
Brother Graham Baslis, thank you for that introduction, and thank my brothers in Omega for holding this event this evening. Very, very important. As the chairwoman said, every 4 years we hear that the upcoming election is the most important one, and I think that holds true this time out. A few things I want to point out as we get started here. Number one is voter suppression is real. As was mentioned earlier, ever since Shelby County, that ruling came down from the Supreme Court that invalidated part of the Voting Rights Act, it's been more difficult, especially for brown and Black communities, to vote. Voter ID requirements, waiting time, voter purges, exact matches, a number of measures have been put in place that complicate our path to casting a ballot. As Reverend William Barber had said, Jim Crow didn't retire, he didn't die, he just went to law school. Now he's James Crow Esquire. The tactics used to try to complicate the path to voting for Black communities has been complicated by lots of legal and judicial rulings and measures. And the more we organize and resource our communities, the better equipped we will be to have an impact on this election. Though the current president holds a pretty high disapproval rate among Black communities, we would be foolish to think that that disapproval rate in and of itself is going to be enough to increase Black turnout to the point where we have our voices are heard loud and clear in this election. The only way that we can ensure that Black communities will be able to overcome these voter suppression measures will be to organize, to mobilize, and to resource those grassroots organizations, to include the chapters of Omega across the country, to ensure that those communities are prepared and able to cast their vote on election day. There's a long history of Black voting behavior that we'll have to pay attention to in this upcoming election. And that history often includes Black folks voting together to ensure our civil rights protections remain in place. But none of that happens unless we turn out and show up to the polls. And I look forward to the conversation tonight to talk about how we can do that and how we can ensure our voices are heard.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. Next, we have President Derrick Johnson. President Derrick Johnson is a veteran activist who has dedicated his career to defending the rights and improving the lives of African Americans. We are fellow Mississippians, and so that's how I know him. He was state president of the NAACP Mississippi State Conference. He serves as the 19th president and CEO of the NAACP. He was elected to this office in 2017 unanimously, is currently guiding the NAACP through a period. Johnson.
Thank you.
We'll let you have some opening remarks too, President Johnson.
Thank you, Dr. Marion, and thank you for allowing me this opportunity. As the NAACP, the nation's oldest civil rights organization at 111 years old, we stand in the juncture of a history, a moment in which we are confronted with a health pandemic and the backdrop of the economic crisis, with the reality that structural racism still exists to today, with the displaying of the brutal murder of George Floyd, right behind the killing of Ahmaud Arbery, right after the killing of Breonna Taylor, whose murderers have not been brought to justice, in the midst of Amy Cooper practicing her acting skills. Those acting skills that we recall from Emmett Till, where a white woman claimed he whistled at her falsely. Acting skills that was demonstrated with the Scottsboro boys in Alabama. Acting skills where a woman in South Carolina claimed that her car was stolen and a Black man did it and killed her children. Acting skills that we've seen far too often displayed by white women against Black men screaming, whether it's rape, assault, or they're trying to do something to me. In the backdrop of all of that, it was an awakening of corporate America finally recognizing that structural racism actually exists.
and that this new moment of outpour of concern resulted in peaceful protests across the country, where protesters were not just Black, protesters looked like America. They were Black, they were white, they were young, old, male, female. In a moment where we don't know whether or not this outpour of concern around structural racism will end tonight or tomorrow or next year, it gives us that opportunity to decide, are we going to move forward into a future that should be more equal than the past, or turn around and go to the past that we know also familiar? But it's also in this juncture that we can seize upon the opportunity to move from protest to power at the ballot box. And it's only at the ballot box in this democracy that we can decide the direction we're going to go in. Because at the ballot box, we can choose elected officials who can walk into the seats and carry our values. Or we can allow individuals to get reelected or go into public policy positions that lack our values and will be willing to demean us and continue this structural racist system that we know of. But when we leave the ballot box, and if we are successful, and we will be, those policymakers must be made to adopt public policy to reverse the decade-long impact of structural racism. It's a wonderful opportunity if we can seize upon it, maximize it, and walk into seats of power, whether it's local, state, or federal. Local, all of the district attorneys across the country who refuse to bring charges when Black men and women are killed in the streets, killed jogging, or killed sleeping in their bed. Because it was a district attorney in Georgia that refused to bring charges against the murderers of Ahmaud Arbery. It was a district attorney who's elected in Minneapolis who refused to bring charges against those police officers, and the state had to intervene. It is a district attorney in Louisville, Kentucky, who refused to bring charges against those individuals who killed Breonna Taylor. And some of these district attorneys are on the ballot this year. But it's also an opportunity to address the racism that's germinating from the White House. So as NAACP, we look forward to partnering with Omega Psi Phi to march into a future that respects us as individuals and to ring loud that our lives, Black lives, truly do matter.
Thank you, President Johnson, for your remarks. Next, we'll have Congressman Benny Thompson. Benny Thompson has served as the U.S. Representative for Mississippi's 2nd Congressional Party. He has been the chairman of the Committee on Homeland Security since 2019, previously holding the position from 2007 to 2011. Congressman Thompson was both the first Democrat and the first African-American to chair the House Homeland Security Committee during that time from 2007 to 2011. I welcome my Congressman Benny Thompson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Marion. To my colleagues, I'm so happy to see everybody. I talked to the Brennan Center earlier today. Eric and I talk almost on a daily basis. My colleague, Karen Bass, was on earlier, and Jim Clavin to come. You know, part of the struggle we have is understanding systemic racism as well as how things get done. Politics is the mother's milk of what we're talking about. I used to talk to my colleague, and they used to say, well, I just want to be in the room. Well, Dr. Marion, it's nice being in the room, but I want to be in the room in charge, because the person in charge dictates the policy. So how do we get in charge? Well, in America, if you're looking at the political realm, we settle our differences at the ballot box. That means November 3rd is how we decide for the next 4 years, the direction we'll take. Elections have consequences. If we don't go vote, then obviously we're not interested in what the next 4 years look like. But I can tell you, these last 3.5 years have really been difficult. But not just people of color, but people who want to do the right thing. So not voting is worse than anything I can imagine. So I'm happy that the men of Omega Psi Phi have decided to put this conversation before the public so we can kind of come up with a strategy for everybody. This is one thing that all of us are in the same boat, whether being a Kappa, Alpha, Omega, whomever. You know, if you're in the boat, you sink. We all sink. So it's in our best interest that we come up with a collective strategy and move forward. And I look forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And lastly, we have Congressman James Clyburn. Congressman Clyburn came to Congress in 1993 to represent South Carolina's 6th Congressional District. He is the majority whip, the third-ranking Democrat in the United States House of Representatives, and currently serves as the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Coronavirus Crisis. He is also the chairman of the Rural Broadband Task Force and Democratic Faith Working Group. Please welcome our brother, Congressman Jim Clyburn.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Marion. And let me thank my brother, Brother Johnson, my leader, Mr. Johnson, and my longtime friend and partner, Congressman Thompson. Thanks to all of you for this forum, this town hall, this evening. Let me just say a couple of things. We often hear people talk about this being the most important. I'm not going to get into that debate, but here's what I am going to say, because it's true. Since 1860, the election of Abraham Lincoln, this election is the most consequential election since 1860. We've had a lot of setbacks along the way. As you know, that election gave Abraham Lincoln the ability to write the Emancipation Proclamations, 2 of them. First one freeing the slaves in the District of Columbia, the second one freeing the slaves in the former, all the slave states. Abraham Lincoln did that. I don't think there's anything more consequential on behalf of a president since then than what we are faced with in this election this year. You've been having 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, but this time we took a step backwards 4 years ago when we elected this president. And if we re-elect this president, I submit to you, this country will go back, lapse back into a period that all of us thought was behind us forever. We cannot allow that to happen. And so what we've got to do as a Social Action Committee, we've got to get everybody together. Everybody got on the same page. We talk about the Divine Nine. Everybody, the Kappas, the Omegas, the Alphas, the Sigmas, and all of the sororities, all the Masonic groups, we have got to start organizing now in an effort to divvy up the work in every chapter of every fraternity and sorority, every lodge, whatever it is, we've got to start now organizing precincts. Adopt a precinct. I have been saying to church groups, every congregation ought to be able to adopt at least one precinct and say, I am going to make it this congregation's business to get everybody in this precinct to the polls on election day. Now, we may have to do it from home, irrespective of whether or not we do it by mail. We ought to be able to vote from home. And we are going to put the money in the budget to get that done. We've got to get the hands and the feet involved in such a way that we can get this thing done this year. Supreme Court is not the only thing that's at stake here. All these courts, I don't know if you all realize this or not, but there's not a single federal vacancy. There were hundreds of federal vacancies when Barack Obama left the office. What this Senate has done, they've changed the rules, and they have now filled out every single federal judge office. And they are not the kind of people that any one of us want to see sitting in judgment of any issue in this country. And if we allow this man to get reelected, the federal judiciary will be changed for the next 100 years. That's a fact. Just look at the time on the clock and you will see that that will happen. So we've got to get busy this year. We got to set aside all those differences that we may have. And we have got to organize ourselves precinct by precinct and get to the polls. All of this junk about whether or not Joe Biden is the perfect candidate. No, he ain't perfect. Ain't none of us perfect. But I'll tell you what, think about the alternative. One of two people will be inaugurated president of the United States in January. Do we want it to be the guy that's sitting there now? Or do we want it to be Joe Biden? So all this foolishness about whether or not he wrote the crime bill of 1994. The fact of the matter is that crime bill is behind us. It is not the same crime bill today that it was in 1994. I was there in 1994. I voted for that crime bill in 1994. And when I voted for the crime bill, I voted for an assault weapons ban. I voted for a violence against women law. I voted for drug courts. I voted to reduce mandatory minimums. Mandatory minimums were put in place in 1986, not 1994. I voted for all these things. I voted for community policing. But Newt Gingrich came along after November 1994, took all that stuff out of the bill. We no longer have a ban on assault weapons. We no longer have drug courts. He's got rid of community policing. And they piled on more mandatory minimums. That is not the same crime bill that I voted for in 1994. And we need to think about that. And we need to educate people to that so we can stop this foolishness. Someone just mentioned 7 years ago when the Supreme Court handed down the case, Eric Holder case, whatever we call the name of the case. It changed the 1965 Voting Rights Act. It did. It gutted Section 4. We still got the 1965 Voting Rights Act, but it's not the same 65 Voting Rights Act that Lyndon Johnson put into law. So we know that that change has taken place. And so you can't blame the people who passed the 65 Voting Rights Act for the fact that we now got voter ID laws. We got voter ID laws because the Supreme Court changed the 1965 Voting Rights Act the same way Newt Gingrich and the Republicans changed the 1994 crime bill. So it's time for us to stop and start thinking about what it is that we are facing today. I don't want to see my children and grandchildren go back to what my grandparents and my parents lived through. That's incumbent upon us. And so I'm glad to be here tonight. And I want my brothers to think about, I don't care whether you're Alpha or whether you're Kappa, I don't care what you are. Bennett Thompson is one of the best friends I've got, not just in the Congress, but best friends I got in life. And he's a Kappa. That's not the only mistake he's ever made. He's made other mistakes. So I want us to get together and let's not say that we ain't going to allow these divisions, these artificial divisions to come between us. This election this year is serious business, and let's get serious. Thank you. Now you're back.
Thank you so much, Congressman Clyburn. You've answered a lot of questions about that I hear in the street about Vice President Biden not being a perfect candidate. So I thought your remarks were spot on. I'd like to talk a little bit about voter suppression. I know growing up in Mississippi back in the 60s, voter suppression looked like a black man or woman would go into the poll to vote, and they may have a watermelon on the table, and he'd have to guess how many seeds were in the watermelon, or there'd be a bar of soap, and he or she'd have to guess how many bubbles were in that bar of soap. And if you couldn't answer those questions, you couldn't vote. What does voter suppression look like today? And if I could, let me go back to Dr. Johnson, because I know you talked about the 5 myths of a black voter, and you've looked at voting rights in our history. Can you talk some about that? And if anybody else wants to chime in after that, they can. But let me go to you, start with you, Dr. Johnson.
Yeah, so voter suppression today looks like the passage of laws and the implementations of certain rules and regulations that complicate the path to the ballot box for voters of color in particular, especially black voters. One example is in Texas. They passed a law that said you have to bring an ID to vote. A gun license is acceptable, but a university ID is not acceptable, even if it's issued by a government, a state university system like the University of Texas. Well, 80% of the handgun licenses issued in the state of Texas in 2018 were to white Texans. And over half of the students in the University of Texas system are students of color. And so by implementing a simple voter ID requirement and not allowing the one used most by brown and black students and permitting the ID used most by or most held by white Texans, you are effectively easing the path to the polls for white voters and complicating the path to the polls for black voters. Another example is in the state of Georgia, where they've passed these exact match laws, where if your name on your driver's license doesn't match exactly the name held by the voter registration rolls, then your name could be purged from the voter registration rolls so that when you show up to vote, your name doesn't show and you're not eligible to vote, or you have to cast a provisional ballot, which may or may not be counted. The issue with this is if you have a name with an apostrophe in it, the system in the voter registration system may replace that apostrophe with an underline. And so now it is not an exact match in your name, and you won't be permitted to vote, or your vote will be more complicated. And I think the number was upwards of 2/3 of the folks affected by this law were people of color. So this is what voter suppression looks like. It's colorblind policy on its face, but in its implementation, it has a racially disparate effect on voters of color. And we could go down the line through purges, exact match, voter ID laws. But what a federal court found in the state of North Carolina was that the laws that they passed there targeted African-American voters with surgical precision. Essentially, the Republican Party in the state of North Carolina went and found out how black folks voted and then wrote into law outlawing or complicating those methods of voting in order to depress black turnout. So this is what black communities are up against in 2020, and if we and this is the fight that lies before us in the years ahead.
Dr. Marion, let me make a comment on that. The Republican Party led an assault on these methods of suppression. If you remember, President Trump talked about all these people who are cheating. After he got elected, he created a commission to go look at it. And it was so bad till they had to basically disband it because they couldn't find any cheating. And supposedly this was part of the reason. Now I say that to say that there are 26 states right now that have some form of ID. But of those 7, you have to have a specific government ID. Now that's a problem because let's take Mississippi, for instance. You could have a social security card. We still have a lot of people and they don't have pictures on them. So in Mississippi, a social security card is not. We have a number of people who don't drive. So basically, I have to go to the courthouse to take a picture, then that's sent off, then I have to come back and get my ID. So rather than coming to registering and getting the ID, I have to do it twice. But as important is that if now they're closing precincts. If you look at what happened in Louisville, Kentucky, where they had a number of voting precincts, and a week before the election, they got rid of all of them. Well, if the Shelby case had not been decided under to get rid of Section 5, they would have had to submit the closing to the Justice Department for approval. But now they don't have to do that. So now we have basically opened the I would say lot gate, but maybe city boys don't know what a lot gate is, but we've opened the gate so that people can just come in and cheat anyway. So this administration has incentivized those methods of that. And in this COVID environment, now can you imagine in Louisville, Kentucky, having one voting precinct for a city of over 600,000 people? And you can imagine what catastrophic impact you could have had if somebody obviously had COVID. So this is not a real friendly administration, and voter suppression is real. Our state, we don't even have early voting. So all we have is absentee voting. So there's a whole hodgepodge of things out here. Derek and all of us try to get our legislature to adopt some form of that, but you know, it's all about politics. And if they see this as a method of enfranchising people to vote, then people of color will always have a difficult chance.
I was going to ask President Johnson to speak on this because I know the NAACP has been looking at this issue of voter suppression for quite a long time. We've seen the long lines in Wisconsin. We saw the long lines in Georgia, the voting machines malfunctioning. I know you've seen and your organization has done a lot in this effort and in this area. Would you speak on that?
Sure. You know, I had a professor at Tougaloo College, Congressman Thompson, our alma mater, and his professor was a former state senator, Henry Kirksey. And Kirksey was really clear. No one is going to give you power. You got to take it. And in that dynamic, they're going to do everything they can, including cheat, to stop you from getting it. And so I start from the premise, the number one thing to address vote suppression is vote turnout. They can suppress votes, but if we increase turnout, we can overcome much of the suppressive method. Elections is a game of inches, not miles. they're trying to shave off fractions of percentages of the vote because elections are being determined by close, smaller margins. And so it is important for our legal organizations and the bar to focus on how to address vote suppression methods. But unfortunately, unless the injury has occurred, there are very few remedies because Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act no longer exists. So we fight hard on the front end through legislation. We identify the potential harm that's going to be created. But until there is an injury, it's hard to bring a case in court. So the thing we got to do now is turn up the vote. That if we anticipate that the pie is only going to be so big for this election, we have to plan to increase the pie of Black voters so we can overcome the barriers they're going to put in front of us. Politics is not a game of fairness. Politics is not a game of fairness. It's a game of power. And in a democracy, our vote is our currency, and that's the power. And we have to collectively leverage our currency. So it's incumbent upon all of our Black institutional organizations to figure out ways to increase the number of people who go to the polls, because they're not going to give it to us. They're going to shut down precincts. We know that. The Brennan Center have done some great research on that. They're going to make it more difficult for you to cast your ballot. We've seen what happened in Wisconsin, forcing people to choose between their health and their right to vote. They're going to create scenarios where lines are longer than they should be. But all the things that they're going to do, we got to anticipate and still persevere through that and overcome it, because this is a game of power, not fairness. And we start from a power conversation, not a fairness conversation, and we will end with the power.
Thank you, Burn. We talk a lot about that top ticket, but it's also important to know about those down ballot races and their importance in terms of state legislatures, particularly this issue of redistricting. As you add to the conversation, if you want to speak on about voter suppression, talk some about those issues. A lot of people go to the ballot box and don't really know any of the down ballot candidates, and vote one without really knowing them. Can you talk about the importance of knowing, being Congressman Clyburn? Did you hear the question, Congressman?
I missed
Clyburn?
the last part of that. I'm sorry?
Yeah, no.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I just wanted
You
you
were
to speak
frozen for
on
the last part, I think.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Not, I'm hearing every other word, but I think I got the gist of your question. It's about down ballot races.
That's correct.
Okay.
If I heard correctly, I think that what we've got to get people to understand about these elections, and it's kind of amazing to me that we have so big a turnout when we have presidential elections. And I say to people all the time, no president has ever been to your school board meeting. No president comes to your city council meetings. No president goes to the county commission. We've got to get people to understand that, yes, it's important as who the president is, but just as important is electing state legislators. Benny and I are at the mercy of state legislators because the congressional districts are drawn every 10 years based upon the census count. And the census count, if you don't fill out the census, you could very well be determining how little representation you will get. So the census count leads to the voter turnout, and it also leads to how much money comes into these congressional districts. If you don't fill out the census, for all intents and purposes, you do not exist when Congress start divvying up the money, because we use the census to determine when grants are allocated, how much it goes where. So we've got to get people to really focus on the census count, focus on local elections as well. Because after this election this year, that's what I meant when I said the most consequential. Because if we do not get legislators elected who look like us and who think like us, we could very well see a diminution of Black legislators, as well as what I would call compassionate legislators in these seats. That's what makes this so consequential. I noticed that Brother Johnson mentioned that language from the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals about throwing out North Carolina's congressional lines because Jim Wynn, a Black member of the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, that's who wrote that language. They did it with surgical precision. If that were not Jim Wynn sitting there, a Black guy from North Carolina, and somebody else sitting there, I don't think we'd have gotten that kind of decision. And because of that language, they threw out North Carolina's congressional districts and had to redraw the lines. And now we've got 2 African Americans from North Carolina, where we had 2 all the time. We're about to get what I think we have the chance of getting 2 more. And I'm almost sure we're going to get 1 more, because we got new lines. Those new lines were drawn because Jim Wynn was so good at writing that opinion. That's the consequence of having someone who would nominate Jim Wynn to the court, as opposed to having this guy that we got now, who would never nominate a Jim Wynn to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals.
Any other comments about that redistricting and how those down ballot races can impact us?
Grandbusters, man, I don't know if you can hear us, but we're having real problems with you. I think you've frozen again. No, I can't see you.
Can you hear me? Shake your head if you can hear me. Derek, you hear me? Okay, I think, okay, they can hear me. Okay. I was just asking if there's anyone else.
You may need to talk. We can't see you. We need to do something here.
Okay, can you see me now?
Well, I can see you.
Okay, all right, good. Well, I'm gonna run with it.
Yeah,
I'm gonna run with it while I can, Congressman Clyburn. I think they all can see me.
I got a technician here too, Bennett, so don't blame it on me.
Look, you pay your bill?
I see you.
Okay.
I see Derek. I see Ted. But I think something's going on with Dr. Marion.
All right, well, can you hear me though? I don't think Congressman Clyburn can hear me either. But let me go to one of the other ones talking about those down ballot races and redistricting, and talk some about the coronavirus and how that's impacting voters at this time. Who'd like to speak on that?
So I'll start quickly with redistricting. You know, I can recall when Congressman Thompson and I, we were looking at the 2010 redistricting map. And we took on working on the legislative plan, and we were successful, but for the Mississippi State Senate realized what we're up to. And they refused to adopt the final plan from the House and some of the things we were able to put into the Senate plan. And as opposed to adopt the plan, we had to file a lawsuit against them. But in the midst of that, in order for us to protect the 2nd Congressional District, the only district of the 4 districts where Blacks can elect a candidate of choice, Congressman Thompson's district, we end up meeting late in the evening at the Capitol in a room to cut the deal. So when the other part of the plan was moving forward, we protected that district. We were only able to protect that district because we had the semblance of some teeth from Section 5. And so they were bound to protect it, although we had some individuals who didn't want the 2nd Congressional District to come in their neighborhood. So we drew around it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
This cycle, we won't have the protection of Section 5.
Mm-hmm.
This cycle, probably neither he nor I will be in the conversation when the maps are being drawn. And the outcome of how these maps will get drawn, whether it's the legislative seats or a Senate seat, may not reflect the needs and interests of our community. It's a power game. And when we go to court, because of all of these federal judges who have been appointed, we may or may not, even though the law is on our side, win, because they would change the law with us understanding that the law is fluid, it's not stagnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so redistricting is perhaps the most powerful tool in the arsenal of providing people access to voting, because it draws the political boundary lines to determine who will have the power. And it's the down ballot races, the legislative races, whether it's a city council legislative body, a county commission or supervisor legislative body, or a state legislative body, that's who controls the drawing of those political boundary lines that ultimately determine the fate of a lot of folks. Mississippi have more Black elected officials than any other states because of redistricting, because we had a person who had the foresight to see it in 1966, and 9 trips and 14 years to the Supreme Court ultimately resulted in breaking the back of what was taking place in this state. But it was also in 1990 redistricting cycle having enough courage to speak against the current of the status quo to say we're not going to accept these 8 seats, because I see 21 seats, and he doubled the size of the legislative Black caucus for state legislative bodies.
Mm-hmm.
We are in a fight. It has nothing to do with fairness, and the drawing of the political boundary lines redistricting is the beginning after the taking of the census of that process.
Yeah, and if I could add on there, that's extremely important, the census and the impact that has on who we count, who gets counted, and then how that determines how power is distributed. Now, at the Brennan Center, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and so we've looked at how states have drawn their line across the country, and we've come up with a set of solutions to help get the partisan playing out of it, and get commissions that draw these lines in a way that give the people the most voice possible. So one of the ways we can do this, as President Johnson mentioned, the state assemblies, state legislatures usually sit down to determine where the lines are drawn. And what we at the Brennan Center are advocating for are independent commissions that will come together, perhaps, have folks from both sides of the aisle, as well as some independent folks, to get together and draw lines where there isn't undue partisan influence on where those lines are drawn. We've seen in places like Wisconsin, where the state assembly there, led by Republicans, drew lines in their state that allowed Republicans to hold to keep the state assembly, to maintain the majority there, even though they did not get the majority of the vote in their state. Something like 55-60% of Wisconsinites voted for Democrats, but Republicans, because of how they drew the lines, ultimately ended up maintaining control of the state assembly. That's what happens when these districts are drawn unfairly and gerrymandered. They bake in partisan advantage. And what the Supreme Court just determined is that basically partisan gerrymandering is acceptable. Racial gerrymandering is unconstitutional, but partisan gerrymandering, the Supreme Court said the parties need to figure that out. Well, we believe that independent commissions need to be involved here. And we've also seen that partisanship is beginning to intersect with race. So you can actually do a racial gerrymander and then call it partisan and pass Supreme Court muster. The last thing I'll say on this is that this also influences the number of votes each state gets in the Electoral College, because of the census, again, reapportions representational power. And so we also believe that the Electoral College has had its day, and that a national popular vote is a better way to ensure that the gerrymandering and the games that are played with how folks are counted and where lines are drawn, that is disempowered, and that the voice of the people have more say in who leaders of their country are nationally, as well as who lead their local communities and their states.
Let me ask Congressman Thompson this question, because if I'm an African-American voter, then I would certainly conclude that the fix is in. We talk about you hear the talk about the system is broken, but this is actually a system that is working well if its objective is to suppress the African-American vote. There's been a lot of talk about mail-in voting,
Okay,
but we've seen problems with mail-in voting where folks get ballots late or they mail them on time and they still get there late. Congressman Thompson, what
our host seemed to be he can't hear us, huh?
I think I hear. What can an African-American voter do?
I'm sorry?
We can hear you now.
Yeah, we hear you.
Dr. Marion.
Hold 1 second.
You don't hear Dr. Marion?
Yeah, we can.
Tell Jim to hold on a second. Let's see if we can fix that while you answer that question, Congressman Thompson.
Well, thank you very much. You know, the key to it is that 111 days, we need to come up with a plan. Obviously, the plan, if we had more time, we could do it. But Derek and everybody have talked about the need for people to get together. In some states, we have early voting capability. We need to maximize that early vote capability. Absolutely. In the South, we have spots of early voting, but like what we plan to do here in Mississippi, we get absentee ballots 45 days out. We're going to have a maximum effort on that 45 to get everybody who's eligible to vote absentee rather than go on election day. Now, there's a direct correlation to the COVID-19 situation, because to the extent that we can keep people away from the polls on election day and you can vote early, that's good. And those folk who don't get a chance to go to the polls and not have to stand in line all day and all of that. But there are also some oversight responsibilities that we all can do. Part of what's happening is they are still consolidating precincts in certain areas. They are making it more and more difficult. So we all have to become committees of one to monitor those election commissioners in our area to make sure that they don't do that, that they actually make voting easy, not difficult. The second thing we need to do is to make sure that they have enough machines and personnel at the voting precincts to handle election day. Now, what Derek and a lot of us are going to have to do, we have to ramp up the conversation so that people know to ask these questions. In Mississippi, more specifically in Hinds County, we're actually advertising for election workers right now for November 3rd. So we hope that if we can identify those election workers early, we can have a cadre of people there who can be helpful. So we all have to monitor the situation. All of us belong to some basic religious organization. Well, the Trump administration has now said it's all right to talk politics in the church. Well, you know, most of us have been doing that all our life, but now you don't have to fear that Internal Revenue is going to come and take your tax-exempt status because you had a conversation about voter education, voter mobilization in your church. So whether you're a Catholic, Lutheran, Protestant, or whatever, now is the time to start that organizing conversation around what are we going to do to maximize turnout for November 3rd.
And I just want to say to all of you too, I serve as the vice chair of the Council of Presidents. And so all of the fraternities and sororities are working together as it relates to voter turnout, voter registration, mobilization, and education. As we were talking about those down ballot races, we all have a partnership with the NAACP. So all of us work with President Johnson to kind of turn out that vote. We know the fraternities have started an initiative to try to register an additional 1 million African-American male voters, because African-American men oftentimes are seen as not voting at the same rate as our African-American women. So I don't know, Congressman Clyburn, if you can see and hear me now.
Yeah, I do.
Okay, so we were just talking about, it appears that the fix is in when it comes to voter suppression. Some folks were talking about the system is broken, but it's actually working according to plan if it's to suppress our vote, you know? So what is it specifically that we can do as African-American voters to make certain that we vote and that our vote is counted?
Well, I think that you're touching on that. We've just got to organize, be it the churches, be it the fraternities, sororities. We've just got to really organize the way we've never organized before. It can't be just the traditional way of doing it, because we're not going to be voting the traditional way this year. Most people are going to cast their ballots before Election Day, because this pandemic is not going away. As many of you know, I chair the Select Subcommittee dealing with COVID-19, and I can tell you, it ain't going away before this election. I have no idea what's going to happen when kids go back to school. Some of these states are forcing them back to school. We could very well have catastrophic consequences. But we had elections during the Civil War, so we can have elections. But I think they're trying to find an excuse not to have elections. So what we've got to do is organize as if Election Day, I don't know, Benny, y'all do absentee, we do absentee in South Carolina as well. We don't have early voting, but you can get an absentee ballot with a good reason 30 days out. So I'm trying to get people in South Carolina to start their efforts, organized as if October 3rd is Election Day, rather than November 3rd. And so we can bank ballots early. That's what it's going to take. Because if we wait on Election Day, remember what happened in Louisville? It was just a couple of days before Election Day when they made the announcement that they would collapse all the precincts in one.
That's right.
So we got to start early. So my plan here is October 3rd is our target date. And we are going to organize to start the vote on October 3rd. Everybody's got to work on Election Day. It doesn't say where you working. You give a reason. I got to work.
Right.
It may be cleaning the house. It may be cutting the yard. Whatever it be, you got to work on Election. That's always been my reason. I always have to work on Election Day. And so I just think that we're going to have to be creative with how we get this done, because these guys do not plan to have an election. They do not plan to get these votes counted, and they're planning to keep as many foreign folks involved in this effort as they possibly can. Let me sound one other warning, and that is all of this stuff you're going to hear after Labor Day about people, about parties, about candidates, is all designed to suppress the vote. Don't believe a thing that you didn't hear said with your own eyes or your own ears, or a thing that you hear about having been seen, unless your eyes have seen it, because they're going to try everything they possibly can to keep this guy in power. And this will be the worst thing that could happen to us as a people. Now, I'll be 80 years old come Tuesday, so it ain't going to have the kind of impact on me that's going to have on my grandchildren.
Right.
They're my children. Let's think about the future, not ourselves. Think about what we want to leave for our children, irrespective of what may be there for us next year this time. This is going to be a tough election, and we have got to toughen up.
And the one thing, I don't want us to get lulled to sleep about what the polls are saying.
Absolutely.
In 2016, the polls said Hillary Clinton was going to win the race going away.
Right.
And so all of a sudden, people broke out the champagne on Monday. They didn't go to churches the Sunday before because they already said, the polls said we got it. Well, what I do, Dr. Marion, is I always ask folk in my district, when the last time you've been polled on anything? And they said, ain't nobody called me. I said, you're right. Said most of our folk have cell phones. When polls are taken, they call folk on hard lines. And so, this whole notion that somehow these polls are moving in a direction is part of what we have to resist. And we, as Jim has just said, we got to fight this thing up until November 3rd, and irregardless of what the polls are saying, because the devil is busy. The fact checkers have said that Donald Trump has lied over 20,000 times since he's been president. Now, why in the world would you believe anything he's saying from September to November? But he got all the money in the world, and he's gonna keep repeating it. And obviously they'll go find one or two folk out there to say he good and he did all that. But the conscience of what we have to do is organize, and not be distracted by these polls. I am, and this is a personal thing. When I see the Biden campaign now talking about going into areas that look like they're turning in a direction, I want to say, hey, if you let the consultants hijack your campaign, you put winning at risk, because that consultant get paid more if he can get you to spend more money. And so what you got to do is stick to the game plan. I've been on the winning and losing side of a lot of elections. Nobody ever asks you who lost. They ask you who won.
Right.
And so I think that's what we have to keep focused, is the goal is to win, not to run the tab or anything like that. So I would say that we need to stay focused as a body and as a people, and not get distracted with things that could alter the outcome of the election.
I got a note that it's time for some Q&A, so I'll wait for those questions to come up, but I'm gonna let President Johnson, I saw him lean in a couple of times, so I know he wants to say something on this conversation.
No, I was about to say it's hot under this light. I was just trying to get some air here. So you get some questions.
All right, we're going to wait to see what questions come up. Are you concerned? I heard Congressman Thompson talk about being lulled to sleep, and there's a lot of emotion, and there's a lot of excitement and anger and frustration going on right now that really, if the election were tomorrow, we probably have a great turnout. And I hear your concern about, will it still be there for November 3rd? But my question is, are you concerned about anyone hijacking this movement or this enthusiasm? I've seen that and heard about that in years past. And anyone concerned about that?
Absolutely. The wind blow every 2 days, 2 weeks in terms of the mood of the country. No one would have projected we'll be sitting here and corporate America is talking about structural racism 2 months ago, more or less 3 months ago. So what's going to happen 3 months from now could be anything. The whole phraseology of defund police can get hijacked and get used against us because it has no definition. The concept of Black Lives Matter, which is a factual statement, was used in 2016 against us, and we didn't even know it until after the election was over because Russia had used it to scare white folks to the polls. So no matter what the outlook is today, each day, each week, things change so fast because when you see media today, it's unlike we've ever seen before. It's democratized in a way in which I can be sitting next to you and you can be consuming media that I have no concept about, and it's only targeted to you through social media. And so it's the statement that if all you do is listen to Rush Limbaugh on the radio and you watch Fox News, we can't have a real conversation. And you have a lot of people like that. And unfortunately, you're getting more Black folks like that they're listening to a line of conversation that none of us here know anything about. This whole concept on social media with this group called ADOS. Who are they? Where do they come from? Right? They try to narrow conversation down around reparations, which is nonsensical because they narrowed to say only those who are descendants of slavery are entitled to anything considered about reparations, as if discrimination stopped when slavery ended. That is nonsensical. But most importantly, why is that even a debate? To say that if you don't agree with me, there's something wrong with you, you're not Black enough. There is a tendency for those who oppose who we are and what we make up to try to feed around the edges to break us up. And what it looks like today would change in a month from now. By the time we get to November, we have to be prepared and agile enough to address all of the distractions and stay focused on the outcome that we all believe need to happen.
Good stuff. Let me ask some of these questions. One is, Brother Clyburn and Congressman Clyburn and Congressman Thompson, what measures can we take collectively to progress the anti-lynching bill that has been put forth by the Senate that is currently sitting on Rand Paul's desk? And how do we ensure a police reform bill that's put forward to hold police accountable?
You want me to go, Ben?
Well, either one of us can take it. We've already done our side of the House. It's over in the Senate now, the anti-lynching bill. And obviously Rand Paul basically is against it. And again, that's another instance in being in charge. Democrats are in charge in the House, so we can bring certain legislations to passage, but it has to go to the other side. And you know, Mitch McConnell is in charge. He's the same guy that told Barack Obama that as long as he was there, his job was to make sure that he'd be a one-term president. Obviously, it wasn't, but he's been a thorn in the side of Black people, brown people, right-thinking people ever since he's been there. So there's the only hope on moving any of this legislation substantively is either the November 3rd election or somehow, Jim, we can go to conference and negotiate some of these things out that we have already passed in the House that will probably come up in the HEROES legislation that's in the Senate.
Congressman Clyburn? Yes. Or we might put something to that effect on one of the appropriation bills. As Benny said, we passed it. Bobby Rush, that's Bobby Rush's bill. I think we named it after Emmett Till.
Yeah.
It's the Emmett Till anti-lynching bill. And we passed it in the House. And it's sitting over in the Senate. There's nothing Benny nor I can do about the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that simple. We are a minority in the Senate. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I keep trying to impress upon people is, remember, the House is 1/3 of the equation. The Senate is the 2/3. The White House is the third. Even if you pass it in the House and pass it in the Senate, and the president vetoes it, you got to have 2/3 vote of the House and the Senate to override it. So we have got to be vigilant on all fronts. So Rand Paul has got a hold on the bill. If he released the hold, it's not going to stop somebody else from putting a hold on the bill. I don't think he's the only guy over in the Senate that's against it. I think that he's doing it now. Somebody else is waiting to put a hold on it as well. So that's the thing that we're up against. And the same thing with the policing bill. We passed a very comprehensive justice in policing bill. We've outlawed chokeholds. We have outlawed no-knock interests. We've demilitarized the police. We've eliminated racial profiling. We've got all of these things past the House, sitting over in the Senate. And Mitch McConnell is refusing to bring it to the floor. That's why it's so important for us to get involved in these other races. Alabama is going to have a Senate seat that we got to try to keep with Doug Jones. Jimmy Harrison is doing well here in South Carolina. The last poll I saw had them tied at 42-42. Cunningham is leading up in North Carolina by 4 points. We win some of these seats. All we need to do is pick up four Senate seats. The rules change.
There's no substitute for being in charge. If you're in charge, you dictate the policy. But I can also say, if you know people in Arizona, if you know people in Maine, if you know people in Colorado, all those are in play on the Senate side. So we, in addition to the ones that Jim talked about, we can, and those are what you call down ballot races again, Dr. Marion. So it's not just president, it's the Senate elections, the House of Representative election, on into state and local. So it's really important that we educate the public, and we've all seen it. People are going to ballot box in the precinct and vote for president and walk out.
Right.
And so we have to make sure that we educate the people with a sample ballot or whatever, that, all these races are important.
Right. I mean, there's a question in the chat and in the Q&A that's interesting to me because we have talked a lot, but one of the questions suggests that this person doesn't believe that the Congressional Black Caucus has been vigilant enough and in dealing with the president and his administration. And I'm not sure what that means, what it is they're looking for. I see President Johnson smiling on that one, but I want to give you all a chance to kind of speak to that. What would you say to this person in saying this?
I've never been elected to public office in my life, but I'm a Detroit Piston fan. And if you ask me, they're going to win a championship every year. And the day after the game, I always, figure that, their point guard should have done it this way or they would have won. Or if the center would have just done it that way, and I know we could have scored. But when you're in the game, it's a different reality. It's one in which that you have to look at dynamics much differently. And in fact, it's the long game. It's not the transaction of who's one-upping each other on television. It really is being in the game. But when you're spectating the game, it's always easiest to talk about how someone should have took a layup instead of dunking the ball, or how someone should have shot a three-pointer as opposed to pass the ball. That's the easy thing. I always encourage people that if you think it should be done better or different, get in the game, because we need more good elected Black officials. And here's an opportunity to get in the game.
I saw a question. Aside from voting procedures, have we collectively organized a Black agenda, chosen our candidates that we will hold to the fire to accomplish our collective goals?
You can't hold anybody to the feet to the fire until you get them elected. We got to get people elected. We're talking now about how we are going to organize to get people to the polls, to get people elected. We've got the candidates out there, and we've got to get these candidates elected. Then we'll sit down after January, when there's a new Congress, new House and Senate, and we'll talk about how to hold people's feet to the fire. We can't hold anybody accountable now. Everybody's out here trying to get reelected, including me. And after the election, I want you to hold my feet to the fire. I want you to hold Benny Thompson's feet to the fire. I want you to sit down and tell us what it is you think we ought to be doing. And let us explain to you, as you just said, Dr. Marion, why we did it this way. I think Derek has said, we can always second guess anybody. I don't know why anybody would think I would do anything to destroy the future of them 3 daughters of mine and them 4 grandchildren of mine. I'm doing everything I possibly can to make sure they don't have the kind of life their grandparents and my parents had. And so we're working as hard as we possibly can. That's why we passed this Justice and Policing Act. I would like to see what person out there that doesn't like that act. I would like to see who is it that feels that we should not have passed the bills we passed on the Affordable Care Act to make sure that people with pre-existing conditions get protected. We got a president that's in the Supreme Court, that's before the Supreme Court right now, asking the Supreme Court to get rid of Obamacare. While we arguing about COVID-19 has exposed the fact that we've got scores of people. I just saw the number the other day on how many, I think 23 million, I forgot what the number was, I don't want to say. Millions of people have lost insurance because they've lost their jobs and their insurance was tied to their jobs. And we got an administration who's refusing to allow them to come into Obamacare. Come on. What the world, what more can we do?
Right. I see you, Dr. Johnson. Go ahead.
Yeah. So this question, this one was about the secret. So in terms of the Black agenda, that's the part that I wanted to get at. Number one, we've all been to barbershops and churches and attorney meetings and everything. You know that there's not one thing that everybody agrees on should be solved the exact same way. We all, Black folks, they try to bunch us in like we're a monolith and think about problems the same way and want the same solutions. And we know that's not true. But here's what we also know. Almost over the last several years, when you ask Black folk, when you ask Americans writ large what they care about, the things that stand out most among Black voters, 3 things. 1, economic security. 2, healthcare. And 3, education. So if there was to be a Black agenda, it would be centered on those 3 things. Would you allow me to get an education, to have me and my family, our health taken care of, and realize economic security? Can we close racial disparities in healthcare? Can we close racial disparities in wealth and income gaps? And can we close the education achievement gap between the races? That requires public policy and investments. Now, there are differing opinions on how to close those gaps. Some families like school choice. Some families like more investment in public schools. That's why Black folks are just as politically diverse as any other people. But in terms of an agenda, prioritizing what we need to occur first, it's those 3 things. It's around the economy, it's around our healthcare, and it's around our education. That it really comprises the Black agenda as I've seen it.
President Johnson, I heard Congressman Clyburn talk about if 4 states, if 4 Senate seats could be picked up, it'd be a game changer in the Senate. I want to ask you, because I know you've done a lot of target looking at some of this.
what are the key electoral states that are critical in determining election results in November that voters need to get out and vote?
You know, our research was based on 3 months ago. What we are beginning to see, what some of the races we didn't think would be in play or possible are now in play and possible today. Now, we have 11 states where we know that if we increase Black voter participation, we can impact both some local, some state, and some federal elections. 190 electoral votes. I'll try to call them off the top of my head, and that's Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina is in there, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin. We got Texas, and a few others. And some of those are about state legislative races. A few of those are about district attorney races. Some of them are about congressional races. Some is about moving the electoral college vote. But again, what the picture looked like today, some of the U.S. Senate races that are in play, had you asked anybody in February or March, would those seats be in play, they would have said no. But today, with COVID running rampant, with an administration that lacked any true response, with the economic picture impacting Black and white folks, in the midst of what happened in Minneapolis and the racial tension, I think we have a bigger opportunity than we've seen in the last 3.5 years. Now, if it stay like this, it's going to be okay. But again, September can bring a whole different reality. We could be at war with the country of Grenada, like we were in 1982, and distract everybody.
Mm-hmm. 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 You and I've talked before to President Johnson. I wonder, I know it's off the top of your head, but you know, a lot of these states, when we've talked, had we just ratchet up the African American vote, they could have gone another direction. It wasn't that far off. Would you, again, I know I'm pressing my luck with your memory here, but can you kind of talk about that?
Well, I'm not old now. Don't make me old now. You know, a good example.
Hell, I'm old and I can remember that.
The state of Michigan was lost in 2016 by less than 11,000 votes. There were 28,000 folks in the city of Detroit who voted but skipped the top of the ticket. That's an 80% Black city. And that tells you that something went drastically wrong when you have that many people in a city that's 80% Black who actually vote, but they skip the top of the ticket. And the state was lost by 11,000 votes. There was close to 50,000 votes around that Flint, Michigan area. They voted in 2012, but they didn't vote this last time. And so this is a game of inches, not miles. And we're really talking about per precinct, it could be less than 20 people, 50 people per precinct. And so every vote truly do matter. And you know, this concept of my vote don't count. No, every vote truly do matter. And the reason why you see the level of energy against what we're doing, because the numbers are going against them. The demographics are going against them. And they're doing all they can to grab and hold on to as much power for as long as they can, i.e. stacking the federal bench. Because real soon, they're going to have to remake the how they look and what they do, or we're going to be living in an apartheid United States, one or the other.
Yeah, and if I could add on to that.
Hold 1 second. Let me go to the congressman, then I'll come back to you, Ted. Go ahead, Congressman Thompson.
Well, you know, we have members appointed to the federal bench for a lifetime job who've never been to court. Now, people say, is that true? We got several people right now in their late 30s who have been approved for the federal bench on a lifetime job who've never been to court. The majority of the people that this president has appointed didn't even get recommended by the American Bar Association, because he said he didn't need anybody to tell him who was qualified. because he's a genius. And so if I'm a genius, I don't need to get anybody else's recommendation. So that's the kind of executive that we have had to deal with. And as Jim said, when you have a House that's doing the right thing and a Senate that's on the bubble most of the time, not doing anything, and a president that's never doing anything, there's only so much Black people can do in that kind of environment. That's why November is so important, because we can solve that dilemma that we've been in for the past 3.5 years, ultimately 4, on November 3rd. But people have to understand what's at stake.
Dr. Johnson, go ahead, Congressman Clyburn, go ahead.
It is not just that the American Bar Association did not recommend them. These people got a rating from the American Bar Association of unqualified.
Right.
And they still put them on the bench.
Dr. Johnson, we'll let you. We're about to close out. We appreciate you so much. We'll let Dr. Johnson comment on what we have going on now, and then we'll let you all make your last, if you will, your last appeal, because we really need to get out and vote November 3rd. What would you say as we end this conversation with those watching on YouTube and Facebook? So we'll go to Dr. Johnson first.
Again, thank you, Brother Grand Bastos, for this, and thank the members of the panel. I'm honored to be part of this. The one thing I wanted to add on to that last conversation was that Donald Trump won the 2016 election by about 77,000 votes over 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Each of those states, Milwaukee, Detroit, Philadelphia, have high concentrations of Black population. In Milwaukee and in Detroit, Black voter turnout in those cities alone were down 12%. And it wasn't just because folks stayed home. Some of it was because of voter suppression measures. So what all of that says is, if Black voters turnout in 2016 was about 59.6% for Black Americans, if that increases even in the smallest percentage, states will flip. And if it increases much larger than that due to resources being put into mobilization efforts, et cetera, then the outcome may be different, not just at the top of the ticket, to the panel's point, but also on those down ballot tickets that are going to control where districts are drawn, where judges get pushed forward, where judges get elected in states that elect judges, et cetera. My last appeal to voters out there, to all the listeners, would be, do not take for granted, as the Congressman Thompson said, don't take for granted that the polls saying that Joe Biden is going to win this thing as a sign that you don't need to participate. You will have to mobilize and get out and make your voice heard if you want the government to be responsive to that voice. The one example I want to leave you with is in Alabama in 2017, when Doug Jones was elected to the Senate. Alabama has very strict voter ID laws in place, but Black folks turned out. They turned out at a higher proportion than they make up of the state's population in order to elect a Democrat to that Senate seat in a very red state. So voter suppression isn't a good enough excuse to stop us from participating, and it is not strong enough to keep our voices from being heard if the communities and each voter is committed to ensuring that they're part of the process and that the system is responsive to their needs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson. President Johnson, how would you close out? I saw in the chat some folks aren't that crazy about Vice President Biden. We heard Congressman Clyburn kind of start off on that. How do you make the sale? How do you close out?
Not being crazy about Biden, I think you reverse it. Are they crazy about Trump? At some point, it's about our future. And this is not even about partisanship. We have a fellow that's in the White House now that will destroy this country and our community as we know it if we don't address it. That's why people of his own party are now stepping up, the Lincoln Project, to say that we have to do something differently. This is not the normal conversation of discourse around tax policy or anything else. This is about, what type of society we want to live in, one that's stable, that's functioning, or one that's dysfunctional and put our health and our children and our future at risk. And if that's okay, that's where you are. But if you want something different, it is about the November's election. The November's election for local races, for district attorneys, if you don't like how the criminal justice system is playing out. The November election as it relates to the federal picture, if you want access to capital and opportunity. You have two gentlemen who's sitting here that understand what power is, and an election away from having the ability to carry out their wildest dreams as chairman of Homeland Security and the whip of the House to the most powerful individuals in Washington, D.C. And if you care about Black power, you're looking at it right here. So empower them because they are Black and they will do what's in our interests.
Thank you, President Johnson. Congressman Thompson?
Thank you very much. Let me thank the men of Omega Psi Phi for allowing me, a lowly Kappa, to participate on this virtual town hall. But nonetheless, I appreciate it. In 3.5 years, we have, under the Trump administration, we are now the laughing stock of the world. When I see people from Germany, France, England, Canada, they absolutely think we've lost our mind electing Donald Trump president. And only thing I got as a comeback is I said, well, hey, I didn't vote for him, but that's not good enough. A lot of other people should have been engaged. So that's our challenge, is how do we up the ante so we get more people to participate. The other thing is we're a nation of laws and a nation of values. And Black people, more than any other group, understand what it means to be mistreated, picked out, picked on, and all of that. And so this president has brought all that back, glorifying Confederate statues, saying that the Confederate battle flag is about freedom of speech. So all those kind of code words is what we are faced with right now. But if you take one of those three tenets of education as a priority, he gave us a Secretary of Education that in her testimony for confirmation, she admitted that she had never been in a public school building in her life. And so that's who you put over the future of this country and its children, is somebody like that. So the last part, they put children in cages because they don't look like them. Now, I'm saying this now, but by the grace of God, it could be some of our children in those cages. We are a nation of values. We can't let this administration tear our value system down just because he's a very stable genius based on what he says. So apart from that, I appreciate the opportunity to be on the program. 110 or 11 days left. We can all do a committee of one, work like the devil to defeat this fellow. Somebody even told me, and I'm done after this, said, well, what happens if he loses and he won't leave? Well, I promise you, let's make him lose first. And I guarantee you by January 20th, we'll have him and all his kind out of the White House forever.
Thank you so much, Congressman Thompson. Congressman Clyburn?
Well, I think Benny, Derek, Ted have said it all. I would just say this. to all the people who asked that question. One of two people will be inaugurated in January. Only one of only two. Compare the two. And all I'm saying is, for all y'all that got this problem with Joe Biden, I don't have a problem with Joe Biden because I compared Joe Biden to the alternative. I did not compare him to the Almighty. The Almighty ain't going to be on the ballot. The alternative is going to be on the ballot.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all of you. Just a great panel discussion. These are the times in which we live, and we have to be action oriented and make some things happen. We have to be listening out for the dog whistles and understand the code language and code words, as Congressman Thompson talked about. The Divine Nine is doing some outstanding things in this effort. All of us understand our power with almost 2 million members of the Divine Nine. There's a lot of impact we can have in this country together. We all are doing voter registration, voter education. We all are talking about voter mobilization. And so we're all talking about these very things that we're talking about tonight, but we're talking about doing them together. And I talked about the 1 Million Black Men Vote initiative. So we are very excited about what's happening. There's a lot of marching that's gone on in this country since the murder of George Floyd. We've seen it all across the world. But at the same time, I remember marching at 16 with the United League of Mississippi with Skip Robinson as our president. And all of that was important in my life. And these are times that we live in are important. But if we don't march to the polls on November 3rd, this country is in trouble. So I'd ask all of you all to remember that. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.
Is ready.